Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. And my name is Kate Armitage. I'm your host again for our discussion today. And I'm delighted to be joined by Cheryl Clements, who is Head of Business Development at Tusker. Good morning, Cheryl. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well on this gloomy November day. But all good and all the better for speaking to you today. Cheryl, the October budget was much anticipated, I think, and there was a lot of trepidation beforehand. But you and I are going to be reflecting on the recent changes that were announced in the October budget and what the implications are for fleets. So let's dive straight in with P11D and the changes to the reporting that's coming in 2026. What does it mean?
So what it means is there's currently two ways of doing benefit in kind, and that's P46 car form when an employee takes a car, either on a fleet or a salary sacrifice scheme, and then followed up by an annual P11D, or taxing at source, which has been around for quite some time. But the changes that's coming in for 2026, April 26, is that everything will move from the P46 car form and P11D to taxing at source for everybody. So everybody will need to, if they're providing a company car, either by fleet or salary sacrifice, will have to tax at source for that benefit in kind provision.
Okay, all right. And with sustainability at the forefront of fleet decisions now, will these changes help encourage businesses to shift to electric vehicles or more sustainable choices?
It's likely, because really what the changes do is it removes the very manual processes of P46, P11D. It's very manual. There's different ways of doing it. It can either be done by real-time reporting, it can be done by printing a P46 car form off from the HMRC website, manually filling that in and posting it. That does take a lot of administration and resource from fleet operators and people operating salary sacrifice schemes to do that. By actually moving over to taxing at source, it takes away that administrative piece. So therefore, it's going to encourage people to be offering these car schemes, and also by adopting EVs, because they are much cheaper from a benefit in kind perspective. So indirectly, it will have a real good effect on the take up of EVs.
Okay. So so if I'm reading between the line, Cheryl, the administrative burden was potentially putting some employers off from adopting these vehicles, and that should be eased. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it should be. Yes.
Okay. So we've got this administrative burden. Presumably, there's a cost implication as well. Are there any risks?
The only risk to employers and fleet operators at the moment is not to understand what the changes are going to be fully, and then not to take any action, probably until nearer the time. So with opting in for taxing at source, which typically employers have had to do if they want to do it for fleet or salary sacrifice schemes to date, they have to let HMRC know by the new tax year that they want to start changing it. So you wouldn't typically change from a P11D process, P46 process mid-year. You would do it at the tax year to make it clean, and make it clean for employees as well. But what you can do now is, on what we'd recommend, particularly from a risk perspective, is why don't you early adopt? Why don't you start doing the tax at source piece, which you're going to have to do from April 26 anyway? Why don't you do that from April 25? You've still got 6 months left to get this all in place, and then you're not competing with everybody else to change to tax at source and make it more kind of complex, and maybe slow the process down for yourselves for April 26. So that would be something to consider, definitely.
Okay. And if there are teething problems, then does that give you a little bit of breathing space by going a year early?
It's not so much teething problems because it's a fairly straightforward process to switch
Okay.
from one to the other. It's just understanding. The only other issue that may come up that people need to be aware of, if you use an external payroll provider, everybody who's using that payroll provider might be requesting that the same process is undertaken for April 26. So by you early adopting, you're kind of being ahead of the curve and taking yourself out of that extra issue that might be sort of a bit of a bottleneck with your payroll provider when they're trying to convert everybody over to the same thing at the same time. So that's something else to be aware of.
Okay. Gosh, there's a lot here, isn't there? And so it's a switch from manual to digital. Will all businesses have access to this digital solution, or might it mean that they have to go out and source it?
Doesn't necessarily have to be digital. It is a process that can be done internally. It can either be done in real time, which is digital, or it can be accrued and then
Right.
paid. So you're taking it as the employer from the employee on a monthly basis.
Right.
And then you still have to do a P11D form, even with
Right.
taxing at source, which most people don't realise. You still have to do it, but it's easier because what
Okay.
you're doing is you're doing a P11DB form. And then at that point, you're either giving the monies to HMRC that you've accrued from the employee through the year. So the employee's had it taken from them, doesn't affect them at all. You can either pay it over as an employer with the P11DB form or just provide HMRC the P11DB form so that they can retrospectively just make sure that they've received all the monies that you've been paying over on a monthly basis. So it's determining, although it's the same process, it is determining which process you are going to use, but both are tried and tested.
Okay. I understand, and presumably, I mean, this is in some ways good news for the employee because they're not going to get landed with a nasty tax bill at the end of the year.
No. Which has been one of the issues previously with P46, P11D, because it can be done real time, but not every employer has real time access to P46. That then counts on the employer actually logging in to the real time system to make the change. So what could happen is that at the end of the tax year, and what has happened in a number of cases, is that employees receive back tax bills, which they never understand because
Right.
they think it should just be taken from them on a monthly basis. Whereas it will remove, going to taxing at source will remove that issue and will give employers a lot less noise from their employees because it will be taken from them in real time. Whether it's paid over to HMRC or not until the end of the tax year is kind of immaterial. As long as HMRC receive those monies in one go from the employer, as far as the employee is concerned, the experience has been exactly the same, but hopefully less noise around it because it has been done on a monthly basis rather than being caught up on a quarterly or even annually. We've come across as well.
Okay, great. So I mean, I'm definitely seeing the merits of that. And we've touched on this previously, but let's just go back to there's a change in behaviour here that could affect EV adoption. So that opportunity, I guess, to review the strategy in relation to sustainability goals.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And the other thing that really, really helps this is pulling in what happened in the budget last week. In that, typically we always have visibility 4 or 5 years ahead of benefit in kind rates, so that employees can make the right choice, so that fleet operators can make the right choice, in offering which cars they're offering. We now have, which is great, the visibility of EV, BIK, in fact, all BIK, but particularly for EVs, right the way up to 2030, which is the Road to Zero strategy, which has been brought back by the Labour government from 2035. It was moved out to 2035 by the Conservatives. They've brought that back to 2030. And the really, really good news is that even by 2030, EVs will still be taxed in single figures, which is fantastic news because that means employees are incentivized into those cars even more. They've got the visibility now. They can even take a car on a salary sacrifice scheme over 5 years and know exactly what their net cost is going to be for that entire period, which is fantastic news. So the combination of the two things together is really going to help with adoption. So by that I mean giving visibility to employees the low BIK, and also the fact that the process becomes a lot easier for employers. So it removes those barriers to providing those cars on the scheme.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so you've touched on quite a few things there. We talk about salary sacrifice a lot, and Tusker has been instrumental and one of the key players in this. So it's great. The low benefit in kind tax on fully electric vehicles has been a massive lever in terms of that uptick. But you're right, because we only had visibility up to 2027 previously.
2028, but actually that made, if somebody was choosing a 4-year agreement, even
yes,
not sure what their final year was going to be, and that it all does put a little bit of doubt into people's minds.
It does. If you're committing to something for 4 years, you want to know exactly what you're signing up for. And now we're saying,
driver, as a fleet operator, even as a company car driver, you still want to know, because you can't, what is my 4th year going to be? I want to hand the car back. Well, that's going to then cause a problem for the fleet operator. If BIK is then announced as being hugely increased, what's the fleet operator going to do with that car? Because there might be an early termination charge to return. So it has a lot of knock-on effects to that.
Well, and there could be an unnatural spike where a lot of people suddenly say, right, well, I'm out, I fold.
Exactly.
But we're going to 2030, so this is positive. And one other thing, Cheryl, you said for people who want to take the car over 5 years, because historically I think it's been more of a 3-year salary targeted 3 years. Are you seeing more people now extending that out to 4 and 5 years?
We certainly are. So 3 years has always been the retail cycle, and of course salary sacrifice isn't fleet, it is an all-employee benefit. So it's looking at that market. It's not looking to fleet, which is an absolutely hugely important area of the economy, and has its place and has its needs. What we did a long time ago actually is increase that to 4 years, because 4 years became the new 3 years for us, because people just want to sign up for as long as they possibly can and have a no hassle car. They want all the maintenance done, they want the insurance fixed, etc. We've been doing that for 4 years for some time, but on the back of driver surveys, because we always survey people, say, what would you like to have seen within the scheme? What's great about the process? What wasn't great about the process? What can we do to learn to change this? And people say, can you do 5 years? Because I just need just to log in, pay a lower amount, and just have the car. I don't have to worry about it for 5 years. I don't have to go to the insurance comparison sites every year and redo my motor insurance. It's just fixed. Can you do that? And that's what we did. So this year with 5 year schemes. And it's interesting. Saw some stats this morning that actually about 15% of everybody placing an order is now placing it for 5 years, which is great from a retention perspective as well when you think about it.
50%.
15. So the majority is still on 28 at the moment, but we're seeing much more of a shift to 15% for the 60, which is more than we expected. We expected sort of between 5 and 10% initially.
Yeah.
It's already at 15, which is
it doesn't surprise me at all. I was very upset to see my last lease car go. I would have happily kept it, and exactly what you've said, Cheryl, because in the 3 years that I had that vehicle, I got a really great value lease deal, and in those 3 years the lease prices have gone up. So if I could have secured that for another 2 years, I would have been a very happy lady, and I'd still be driving that car now.
Lock it in.
So I think I'm going to watch this with real interest, because I think it could make a real difference to people's pockets and to this positive journey.
It's peace of mind. It's having the visibility ahead. It's helping employers to facilitate something like this as well. What's not to love?
It just means you've got to stay with your employer for 5 years, but that's another win for the employer as well.
It's a win for the employer, but also it could be a win for the employee, because they might not be able to get that same deal elsewhere.
No.
But equally, there are lifestyle events happen. We know that, and within salary sacrifice, there is lifestyle protection to help with that. So it doesn't mean somebody has to stay in a really unhappy job at all.
I get that. But if I was an employer, If I was an employer, I would definitely be saying, you know, oh, who's signed up for 5 years? Because I'm like, well, they're the committed, they're the on board
Yeah, they're
employees.
not planning to go anywhere anytime soon.
No,
So that's
yeah.
the talent pool. Yeah.
Yeah, a great indicator. Well, Cheryl, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, thank you.
Loads of insight. I've certainly learnt a lot. So thank you very much.
Very welcome. Thank you.
And of course, thank you to Tusker for joining GreenFleet Talks. That is about all we've got time for. Thank you for watching. Please tune in to GF365 again soon.